Hi, my name is AJ, and I'm here with my next door neighbor, Mr. Jerry Shestak, and he was alive during Vietnam, of course. And we have a couple of questions. So, what was your? Did you have any relatives who fought in Vietnam?
Yes, I did. My brother-in-law, my wife's brother, fought in Vietnam. He was wounded twice, and he survived. He was almost killed twice for each of his wounds.
What was it like knowing someone?
I also had friends that served in Vietnam. I didn't. I did not serve in the service. I had friends that were killed in Vietnam. I had friends that came back from Vietnam. And to tell you the truth, AJ, we were kind of naive. We had no idea what the war was like, what they were going through. But we spent time together and found them to be a little strange because we couldn't understand. They seemed distant when they came back, and they'd be by themselves. Those who'd served together. It took a long time to find out what it was like and some of the stories that they went through. So it was a difficult time for them, and we were very young and naive, so we didn't realize what was going on.
Like, did you notice a distinct difference in their personalities when they came back?
Absolutely, yeah. They're very distant. They looked upon us who didn't serve a little strangely, and it took a long time for some of them to assimilate and come back, so we could all become friends again. I mean, not that we stopped being friends, but it was a different type of relationship. It was definitely obvious after they came back from the war. And I had friends that came back wounded, and from the war, the stories that they told were horrific.
What any stories in particular that struck you as
Yeah, I can
terrible?
tell you stories related to my brother-in-law. Uh, he was a machine gunner. He was 18 years old. He graduated from Chichester High School, and he was a machine gunner and used to go out on patrols and ambushes at night. It took him a long time for him to be able to talk to us about these things. But finally, a couple of years ago, he finally opened up. It really helped him too. Uh, he had been out several nights on patrols, and this one night he wasn't feeling good. So his buddy, a good friend of his, said, "I'll go out in your place, Dennis." So he went out in his place. That next morning, he brought back his buddy in their body bag. It would have been him that would have been killed. And another horrific story, he was in a battle, and a bullet went through his back and struck his friend next to him and killed his friend. It took him a long time to understand why it wasn't him that was killed and not his friend. And he still goes down every year and visits his friends on the wall in Washington. So it was not a good time.
What was your understanding of the war? Did you understand fully why we were over there?
No. The war was going on in the 60s and early 70s. We had no idea. It was a different time. I don't think that we were as educated at that time as people are today, and the history that they read, but we had no idea what was going on. As we grew older, we got into college in later years, we still don't really know why we were there. We had no inkling. Why was there a war? Why we were fighting? What we were fighting for? And we had no comprehension until we started to speak with people who had been there. And it was a different time. It was a totally different time.
What was your opinion of the decisions of President Johnson or Kennedy or Nixon?
Well, it depends. If you look back on them now, I think they were every decision was could have been made differently at the time. And in the environment that I grew up with, the people that I knew, we had no idea.
Yeah.
You know, we were told facts that they're at the Gulf of Tonkin. I don't know if it's in the history books now. That there was a need for the war. Looking back, there was absolutely no necessity for the war. There's no necessity for those 56,000 young men to be killed, the hundreds of thousands others to be wounded. It was a terrible mistake, in my opinion, on that. But at the time, we really didn't know.
Yeah. Were you close to going to the war? How close were you were you considering going to fight?
No, absolutely not. On that. I remember I was in college after high school, started college, and it was in our freshman year. All my friends that had gone to different colleges around the country, and every high school mates didn't go to college. We were all called. They had draft boards back then, and we were were all called to Lansdowne to the draft board. We all went in for physical exams, and we would take intelligence tests. And the sergeant says, "Don't even think about fooling with these. You're all college students. You're going to pass, so don't even think about it." But I wasn't called on that, so I was very fortunate at that time. And no, I never thought about going to enlist.
So were you like legitimately concerned about getting drafted?
Absolutely.
Did you ever like consider like moving elsewhere?
No.
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 'Cause I know some people move to like Canada.
I had two friends that did.
Really?
Yeah, on that. Two of my went to high school with them. They graduated the year after I did, and they also went to college with me. They were a year behind me, and both of them did go to. They were really conscientious objectors against the war, and they moved to Canada. One subsequently came back, and I think the other one is still up there, and it's a long, long time. But I knew two people that did that.
What do you remember about like the protests of Vietnam? Did you ever like see those?
Yes, I did.
firsthand?
Yes, I did. 1968 Democratic Convention was held in Chicago, and a very close friend of mine that we grew up with, who graduated from college a year before I did, he had a job in Chicago. Unbeknownst to me at the time, we made plans to get together. I was going out to visit him for a couple of weeks on that, and it was at the same time. It turned out to be the same time my trip was scheduled for the Democratic Convention. The night before I left, on TV, I don't know if you ever saw it on TV. Maybe maybe your family has. They had the riots in Chicago, the protesters with the National Guard out, and the beatings, and the hippies and yippies and yuppies and everything. And I watched that on television and couldn't believe it. The next night, I flew out to Chicago. My friend picked me up at the airport. He drove me into Center City, Chicago, and I saw the results of everything that happened. There were a tremendous number. National Guard was all out with bayonets around the hotels and the convention. There were people with bandages on their heads, bloody all over the place. There were tanks and trucks and the police. And I remember at the time I flew out in a suit and a tie, and somebody walked by and said, "Take that tie off, because if anything happens, they're going to grab that tie and just beat you." And we stood there and watched everything. So yeah, that was I did see history on that.
What about? Do you remember anything about Kent State?
Yes, I do. On that, there was a protest at Kent State, and the National Guard killed Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young song. What is it? 8 dead in Ohio for no reason.
Yep. Any other protests that like caught your attention besides those two?
Other than the civil rights protests later on, after that, but for the war, no, those were the biggest. And there weren't a lot of protests prior to that time, because I don't think people really knew what was going on.
Yeah. What about like the media? Remember what role they played?
I think they helped people like myself, because they were out in the field. The ones that were out in the field, the cameramen that went out to the battle, and every night on the news you used to see people getting killed, and you used to see the civilians and what happened to them. So I think they did a tremendous job, and they enlightened the nation what was going on towards the latter parts of the war.
So looking back, like on the war, what do you think of it today?
I think it was a horrible mistake. I think it was a tragedy in American history, as I think most wars are.
Yeah.
And I feel so very badly for the 56,000 plus men that got killed, all the hundreds of thousands, I said, that were wounded, and their families and loved ones. I think it was just a disaster.
Do you think there's like a correlation between this war and like Iraq or Afghanistan?
No. Well, the only correlation is I don't think we should be in either place.
Yeah.
With Vietnam, I think we should let the country solve their own issues.
What about you said you saw the protests, right? Did you ever actually like partake in a protest?
No.
No, you never thought about doing that.
No.
And And you were in college at the time, right?
Yes.
So did that protect you from going to? Do you feel like that protected you from going to the war?
No, because they pulled people out of. I just wasn't called. I felt very fortunate. But college at that time, they took people out of the college. A friend who was in graduate school, they pulled him out of graduate school.
Really?
Yeah, and he.
So like you never felt safe like during that time,
No,
really?
no.
So
I always felt too if they called me, I'd go.
yeah.
But I was very fortunate, and a lot of. I shouldn't say a lot of my friends, but a good many of my friends were also very fortunate. For whatever reason, they weren't called either, while others were.
Do you remember, like, like your reaction, like when your friends were called? Do you remember like what happened? Like, were you were you like upset when they were called? Were you scared?
I think all those emotions. I can't remember specifically because it was a long time ago on that, but I just have to say it's glad it's not me.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
You know, but I hate to see them go. Fortunately, of my close friends that were in the service, again, a couple were wounded, and a couple came back, and it took them a while to adjust. But it really only lost one, and it wasn't a close friend, but someone that was considered a friend.
What about the role of like of what was going on in the country, like Watergate, and like did you like just the country as a whole? Did you have much like confidence in the country, like making the right decisions?
Well, that was sometime after, yeah. Well, we didn't know everything that was going on, and a lot of it was hidden. But after it all came to light, it's difficult to. Who do you trust?
Yeah, like,
yeah.
But like, what was your opinion on like Bob McNamara? What did you think of him? Because I know we learned that he was.
Yeah, well, yeah, he was like anything else. You don't know. You think, hope the decisions are right. You find out afterwards. Some of them were right, some of them were wrong. Personally, I didn't care for him at all.
Yeah.
You know, and didn't leave a whole lot of room for a compromise. It seemed to be. It's either my way, you're for me, or you're an enemy against me. But that's the way things are a lot, even today's society in politics. I'm not a real political person on that, but I just wish people would just tell the truth, because it does affect the feeling. I think what's going on.
For another perspective on the Vietnam War, I'm with Esposito. And first off, what was your opinion on the war when you were, younger?
I think most people didn't understand the war. They didn't know what we were fighting for. There was no goal.
No goal. Did you have a full understanding of what was going on when you were younger?
I thought I did. I don't think too many people really did.
What about, did you know anyone who fought in the war?
Yes, quite a few people.
Like who?
A lot of the guys who were a few years older than myself, cousins, family members who were all involved in the war.
What about getting drafted? Was that a legitimate concern for you?
Yes, I was actually the last group of students who ever had to register for the draft. I guess it was, we registered our senior year, and 3 months later Saigon began to fall, and we thought we were getting a graduation gift to South Vietnam.
So, did you ever see protests firsthand?
Never see? No.
No? You never saw it like on TV?
Oh, I saw on TV,
on
yes.
TV.
That was every night occurrence, I believe.
Every night. So like what role did that play, like the media? Did it like change your outlook on the war? Did it?
Yes, it just showed that there were more than just, you disagreeing with the war. There were thousands of others, hundreds of thousands of others who felt the same way.
So, so what about like after the war? Did you, or even during the war, did you have much faith in the United States that they were making like the right decision?
You always hope that they're making the right decision.
But did you?
In this case, I wasn't sure it was the correct decision.
What was your opinion during the Gulf of Tonkin? If you remember the Tet event, during all these occurrences, were you did the media keep you like in tune with what was going on? Or do you
It was probably the first. It was probably the most closely linked news to the events. Every night that was the first 5-10 minutes of the nightly news, the war in Vietnam. So we saw that for 6 years every night.
So there's a correlation between that and like the Iraq, like Afghanistan wars. You think
I think when they first started the Iraq War, that they tried to limit television news broadcasts from being there in a propaganda effort.
Mm-hmm. And what about, and going back to the draft, how close were you to fleeing? Would you ever consider that of fleeing the country? Because I know, because many people try to flee, the country in order to avoid the draft. Were you ever considering that?
I think one of the most difficult decisions of my life was a discussion I had with my father, who actually sat down and he wasn't sure what the war was for, what we had hoped to gain, and my father said to me that he knew some people who had gone to Canada to flee, and my father was a veteran from the Korean War, and he said that if I would ever decide to do anything like that he would support me 100%, because if I didn't know what the war was for, he didn't know, then surely you shouldn't, have to go. But it would be my decision, but he would support it if I were to go to Canada, which I found quite shocking considering he was a veteran.
Mm-hmm. What about your outlook on the war today? Has it changed over time?
I don't agree with the war.
Back then, and you still don't?
Well, I never thought we should have got involved there. But being a Defense Department employee, we do our best to win. We try, do our best for our men and women in the service, and so, our effort is there. Whether or not we want to be there, that's just a personal thing, I guess.
I think that's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.